On a quiet Sunday night in one of Texas's wealthiest neighborhoods, a woman known as Suzanne Simpson ran for her life, turning manicured lawns and gated calm into a scene of terror. Moments earlier, she'd been seen arguing with her husband inside an exclusive private members club, a place where status mattered and conflicts were expected to stay hidden. But whatever followed them home refused to remain behind closed doors. And under the cover of darkness, a neighbor watched as Suzanne broke free from her husband's grip and sprinted toward the wooded area behind their home, her footsteps frantic as he chased after her. She screamed as she ran with her sound, cutting sharply through the quiet neighborhood. Then when the sound stopped, Suzanne Simpson was never seen again. From the outside, Suzanne's life looked carefully assembled and deeply successful. At 51 years old, she was a top-tier luxury real estate agent in San Antonio, known for her work ethic, her precision, and her ability to manage high-profile clients without missing a step. She was also a mother of 4, balancing toddlers and teenagers, school schedules and sports, careers and caretaking, all while training for long-distance races that demanded relentless discipline. Friends described her as energetic but grounded, warm but focused, the kind of person who made difficult things look effortless. She lived in Alamo Heights, an affluent, close-knit enclave where tree-lined streets and historic homes projected permanence and security. It was a neighborhood where routines were noticed, where unfamiliar noises stood out, and where people paid attention when something felt off. Suzanne belonged there. She was active in the community, trusted by clients, admired by colleagues, and deeply present in her children's lives. Her world appeared stable, carefully built, and anchored in responsibility. What no one could see was how fragile that stability had become. Suzanne had been married to Brad Simpson for more than 20 years. Brad was imposing in both stature and presence, a man involved in real estate and construction ventures across Texas. He was confident, assertive, and accustomed to control. To outsiders, he appeared successful and self-assured, the kind of man who took charge of any room he entered. But inside the marriage, however, the dynamic was far darker. Those close to Suzanne would later describe a relationship defined by jealousy and surveillance. Tracked her phone, monitored her movements, and restricted her access to communication. Suzanne learned to move carefully, to explain his behavior away, to minimize concerns so daily life could continue. Friends noticed her caution, the way she measured her words when talking about home, the way she carried stress she never fully explained. What Suzanne was experiencing followed a pattern experts recognize as coercive control, a form of abuse that does not rely solely on visible violence, but on constant monitoring, restriction, and fear. It is designed to make leaving feel more dangerous than staying. Over time, the victim's world shrinks. Communication becomes limited. Independence feels risky. Even simple decisions begin to require permission, explanation, or justification. In relationships like this, abusers often present themselves as protective or concerned, especially in affluent communities where privacy is valued and appearances matter. Control is reframed as care. Surveillance is reframed as love. And outsiders, seeing financial stability and social respectability, rarely imagine what is happening behind closed doors. Victims learn to manage the danger quietly, as they make sure to keep routines intact, avoid escalation, and also plan exits slowly, knowing that the moment control is threatened is oftentimes the moment violence intensifies. Suzanne was not unaware of the risk. She was calculating survival. And in that calculation, timing mattered more than courage. Over time, control turned physical. Months before her disappearance, Suzanne confided in her personal banker. Not as a formal complaint, but as someone quietly preparing for the worst. She spoke about being hit, about having her phone taken, about living under constant watch. And then she said something that would later echo through the investigation with chilling clarity. "If I ever go missing, look for me in a lake." Like many victims of domestic violence, Suzanne kept her fear contained, hidden behind routine and resilience, while privately planning a way out. She spoke to her mother about leaving. She considered relocating with her youngest child and was thinking in terms of escape, of safety, of survival, but she just never got the chance. On the evening of October 6th, 2024, Suzanne and Brad attended a gathering at an exclusive private members club in Alamo Heights, a place designed for polished appearances and private disagreements. On the surface, it looked like a normal social night, but didn't stay that way for long. Witnesses would later describe an argument that refused to stay contained. What began as a disagreement shifted into something heavier, something that drew attention in a room where attention was usually avoided. And according to subsequent accounts, the confrontation turned physical, which made Suzanne hurt, and he left the club, abruptly abandoning the event entirely, in which her leaving was captured on the surveillance cameras. It was later known that she went inside a nearby grocery store, moving through the aisles with visible strain. Her posture was tense, and her urgency unmistakable. This was not someone calmly running errands, but looks like someone trying to hold herself together. What followed made the danger unmistakable. Suzanne began making calls. She told a friend she was coming over. She reached out to her mother and said Brad had assaulted her again. Her voice carried pain and urgency as she described injuries to her arm, neck, and back. She was asking for help without fully saying the word, and almost simultaneously, her phone went dead. Which turns out, Brad had shut off her service. Despite that, Suzanne managed to reach a friend's house for a short time before returning home later that night. Data from her phone confirmed its final location back at the residence. There were no more outgoing calls, no more movement. That was when the situation crossed from volatile to catastrophic. Late that night, a neighbor across the street was jolted awake by raised voices outside his window. The argument was loud enough to cut through the quiet OF the neighborhood. When he looked out, he saw Suzanne and Brad in the front garden, illuminated by porch lights and street glow. This was no longer verbal. Suzanne was struggling to pull away, but Brad was restraining her, physically trying to keep her from leaving. The neighbor watched as she fought to break free, desperation evident in every movement. Eventually she broke free and ran. She sprinted toward the wooded area behind the house, barefoot and panicked, disappearing into the darkness as Brad chased after her. Moments later, the neighbor heard screams coming from the trees, and then everything went quiet. Then the rest of the night passed in silence. Sometime later, Brad's truck left the property. When it returned, nothing appeared outwardly unusual. But by morning, his behavior told a different story. Over the next day, investigators would piece together a timeline that felt less like coincidence and more like orchestration. Brad's phone repeatedly switched in and out of service, a pattern consistent with attempts to avoid digital tracking. Surveillance cameras captured his truck carrying items that didn't belong to any normal routine. Heavy containers, multiple bags, and a large object concealed beneath a covering, deliberately weighted down. Over the next day, Brad's behavior became increasingly suspicious. He went out and bought items typically used for construction and cleanup. Instead of using his usual payment methods, he paid in cash. He drove to several locations that did not fit into any normal routine. Surveillance later showed items in the bed of his truck, only for those same items to disappear after each stop. To investigators, it looked like preparation and disposal. The next day, when she failed to pick up her 5-year-old from school, her friends gathered to discuss her disappearance. A friend of Suzanne called Brad with her concerns, but when she learned Brad had not called the police about Suzanne, she informed him that she would be filing a missing persons report herself. At about 9:57 p.m., following that phone call, the first missing persons report was filed by Suzanne's friend. Then, 14 minutes later, at 10:11 p.m., Brad Simpson left a voicemail for the Olmos Park police chief, reporting his wife as missing. To investigators, the case did not hinge on a single mistake, but on accumulation. Each inconsistency reinforced the next. The delayed report, the controlled phone access, the evasive interviews. None of these details alone proved guilt, but together they formed a behavioral pattern that detectives had seen before. In cases involving domestic violence, disappearance rarely looks random. It follows escalation. It follows threats. It follows attempts to leave. Suzanne's final actions aligned with that trajectory, and Brad's responses aligned with avoidance rather than fear or confusion. No body homicide cases are among the hardest to prosecute because absence creates space for doubt, but absence can also be intentional. Investigators understood early that the lack of remains was not a weakness in the case, but part of the alleged plan. The focus shifted from where Suzanne was to why she could not be found. As investigators pressed for follow-up interviews, Brad became evasive. He missed scheduled meetings. He offered vague responses. He relocated to a rural property away from the family home, physically removing himself from the center of the search. To detectives, the distance felt intentional, a retreat rather than a response to grief. Inside the home Suzanne had shared with her children, police uncovered signs that reinforced the neighbor's account and the children's statements. Walls showed damage consistent with a violent struggle. Personal items were missing. Supplies appeared that did not belong to ordinary household use and had no innocent explanation. At a separate property connected to Brad, investigators made a more disturbing discovery. Burned electronics lay among ash and debris. Phones had been destroyed beyond recovery. Digital traces had been deliberately erased, not lost, but eliminated. Then came the moment the investigation crossed a threshold. Authorities located a concealed power tool, hidden and wiped clean, yet still carrying what could not be erased. Forensic testing revealed Suzanne's DNA, linking her directly to an object capable of causing irreversible harm. There was still no body, and there was still no place for Suzanne's family to grieve, but there was no longer any doubt about what had happened to her. The evidence no longer pointed toward a disappearance or a voluntary absence. It pointed clearly and unmistakably to intent. Brad Simpson was arrested and charged, initially with assault and unlawful restraint, and later with murder and extensive evidence tampering. Prosecutors alleged a calculated sequence of violence, concealment, and disposal designed to ensure Suzanne would never be found. They argued that the absence of a body was not an accident, but the goal. The case moved forward without her remains, built on an overwhelming structure of circumstantial proof, eyewitness testimony, surveillance footage, phone records, forensic findings, financial transactions, and Brad's documented history of control and abuse. Legal analysts described it as one of the strongest no-body homicide cases Texas had seen in years. Throughout the proceedings, Brad showed little emotion. One of her daughters spoke publicly, breaking the silence that often protects abuse behind wealth and reputation. She called attention to the warnings that go unheard, the victims who plan to leave quietly, and the danger of waiting too long to intervene. Her message was simple and devastating: believe women when they speak. As of today, Suzanne Simpson's body has not been recovered. Searches continue across multiple counties. Investigators remain committed to finding her, even if justice must move forward without physical closure. Suzanne is remembered not as a missing person, but as a life interrupted, a mother who ran marathons, raised 4 children, built a career grounded in discipline and trust, and tried to escape a dangerous situation before it ultimately consumed her. This case is not about wealth, status, or image. It is about control, about silence, and about what happens when warning signs are minimized for far too long. Because sometimes the most dangerous place is not a dark street or a stranger's car, but the home you are afraid to leave. If stories like Suzanne's get to you, make sure to stay with us, subscribe, share this case, and help keep her name alive, because silence is exactly what allows tragedies like this to happen again. See you soon.